Needless Things Podcast. Hey, Phantomaniacs! Welcome to the newest episode of the Needless Things Podcast, where we talk about toys, movies, music, and all manner of pop culture dorkery. I am your host, Dave, and last week we put up a great episode of Audible Interlude, a G.I. Joe podcast. You can find that the first Friday of every month, wherever you get your podcasts. I get a lot of positive feedback. Even people who aren't huge fans of G.I. Joe enjoy Audible Interlude. And we also recently did a special episode where we covered PulseCon and all of the G.I. Joe events there. So please check out Audible Interlude, a G.I. Joe podcast. Subscribe, follow it. It's from Anchor Podcasts. Tell your friends about it. It's a lot of fun. We have a blast doing it. And I would do it more if I had the time. So there you go. We are just a few weeks away from Thanksgiving. I already have next week's episode in the can. We're going to be recording our special Black Friday episode this coming Monday. We had to shuffle some things around because, as always happens this time of year, my work schedule's been goofy as fuck for like 2 years now. But right now, it's a little goofier because the holidays are coming. I don't care that much about Thanksgiving, so I tend to work overtime around Thanksgiving because other people are taking the time off, and I like to have the day to be with the family if I can, but it's not one of the more important holidays to me like Christmas or Halloween or Arbor Day, say. But anyway, so because of my schedule, we're not going to be doing a commentary for November. We will be back in December with a commentary. Instead, like I said, we've got a Black Friday special that's going to be going up on Black Friday. Lots of stuff is going on. We just saw the Eternals. Me and the family went and saw the Eternals, and look, it's not a bad movie, but it's not a good movie. It's my least favorite MCU film to date. It's just dull, and they don't do the work to get you to care about the characters. That's just my take. That's what I got out of it. If you loved it, if you thought it was awesome, that's cool. But it didn't do a thing for me. I enjoyed Kit Harington's 7 minutes in the movie more than I enjoyed anything about the rest of the movie. Kumail was great. If they want to do a movie just about Kumail's character, then I'm in. That's cool. But other than that, that's a pass. I think this will be the first MCU movie that I do not purchase on my beloved Blu-ray physical media. So next week is Ghostbusters Afterlife, and I have this subdued excitement about it because so far the trailers aren't showing me that this understands the tone of the first two movies, but I'm still excited. I still hope it's a great new Ghostbusters movie, but I just don't feel the hype. I also don't feel the hype as much if it had come out 2 years ago or whatever like it was supposed to. But we'll be going to see that in the theater, and then we've got Spider-Man No Way Home right around the corner. Lots of great movies coming up. It's the holiday season. That's how it rolls. Also, I want to mention the Needless Things YouTube channel. You know, I mention it every week now. I absolutely love doing the toy reviews. It adds an element of excitement to opening those figures up that I just really like sharing with you guys. If you haven't watched them, go check them out. It's the Needless Things YouTube channel. And my intent is to show the toys. I'm not saying nobody wants to see my face, because I'm sure there are people out there who'd like, hey, we'd like to see your excitement or talk about the toys. I'm there to show you the toys. So when I do the videos, it is a close-up shot of me opening the figure or whatever it is up. You see the figure. Because what drives me crazy, I don't like watching toy reviews where some dude is sitting there in screen holding up a figure that I can't even see. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's not a toy review. This is Ted talking about a toy review, and I talk about it and I show it to you. So that's why I do things the way that I do things. I have been told that my stubbornness in doing things the way that I do things is maybe not always good, but I don't really care because I do them the way I want to do them because I want to enjoy doing them. So go check out the Needless Things YouTube channel. This week, reviews went up for G.I. Joe Classified series from Snake Eyes Origins, Akiko, the Cobra Special Missions Cobra Island Barbecue, and the Master of Disguise Zartan. All went up. I wanted to do one for the Origins Scarlet figure, but I have not been able to get one yet. And as always happens, you'll hear a little bit more about this next week, but I love BigBadToyStore.com. We'll be talking about them in a second here. I'm a huge fan. They are my favorite internet toy source, and what happens every single time is I place an order and then do it goes into your pile of loot. They sort of hold stuff for you. So stuff comes into the pile of loot, and I wait, and I'm like, okay, there should be one more thing coming, and then it doesn't come. And I'm like, you know what? Ship my pile of loot, because it's $4 to ship all of whatever you've ordered that's built up over time. They ship it. So every single time, without fail, when I finally say, all right, the other stuff's not coming in, go ahead and ship my pile of loot, the very next day, something comes in. That's just how it works, and that's fine. So I should have gone ahead and ordered the Scarlet and had my pile of loot shipped like a week ago, and then I could have reviewed it, but I didn't do that. So whatever. That was a long roundabout way of saying, check out BigBadToyStore.com and their excellent pile of loot pre-order system. I also want to talk about the Robo Skull Mark II Kickstarter. I've talked about it here. I've talked about it on Audible Interlude. Well, it ends tomorrow. This is your last chance to pledge and get this incredible toy for the Kickstarter price. I don't have time to tell you about all of the things in this Kickstarter, in this campaign. I can just tell you that if the idea of a giant red skull with articulated TIE fighter wings that turn into almost like spider legs, not really, that's overselling it a little, but they do turn into like ground navigating apparatus, I guess. So picture that. And if that appeals to you at all, go to Kickstarter. Just look up Kickstarter Robo Skull. You can see the history of the Robo Skull vehicle if you Google it. This thing just looks absolutely phenomenal, and I couldn't not have one. So I backed it. I wish I had gone all in from the beginning, because the all-in package, the price has escalated as they have added more and more things. This thing has absolutely shredded their goal. It hit its goal in 95 minutes. The goal was $78,000. And it is now, with 50, as I record this, with 51 hours left to go, it is at $476,488. It has blown away every stretch goal they've set. It's absolutely incredible. I can't wait to have this thing, and go check it out and see if it's something that you feel you need to add to your toy shelf, because it probably is. All right, speaking of crowdfunding, one more thing I want to mention before we get to the episode, which, by the way, is a panel that was recorded live at DragonCon about the Wolves of 1981. The panel was called Werewolves of 1981, but one of the movies does not feature werewolves at all. So for the purposes of Needless Things, this is the Wolves of 1981. Great live panel. We had a blast talking about An American Werewolf in London, the Howling, and Wolfen. But before we get to that, I want to mention one last time, well, probably not one last time, because this campaign actually has more time to go. Let's see here. It is Eagle Force Returns. As of this recording, it has 17 days, 22 hours, and 40 minutes left. And if you go to Big Bad Toy, well, you can go to freshmonkeyfiction.com to get updates on all the stretch goals, or all the goals. And you go to bigbadtoystore.com to actually place your orders for these figures. It's too much to go into. They are fantastic 1/18th scale military / monster / fantasy figures. And just to give you a taste of the kinds of things they're doing, they do have gold soldier figures like the original Eagle Force Force figures, but they also have figures that are possibly a pair of video game plumbers, but definitely not. One that is a male pattern baldness, anxiety-ridden boyhood character, and one where the check is in the mail. And that's really all I can say. I don't know how specific I want to get, but there is a figure called the Gorgills that is a wacky Black Lagoon creature type thing that it's backed. Frank Walsh, which is the one that the check is in the mail guy, is backed. Leon Kelly, who might remind you of a 70s action star, is backed. Blockhead, which is the bald one that you can probably figure out now, is backed. These are all going into production, and there are a lot more to come. So yeah, Eagle Force returns. Go check it out. I mean, again, use the Google. You know how it works. But BigBadToyStore.com, they have a ton of individual figures. And look, these are more than I want to spend for a 1/18th scale figure. But I'm so charmed by the execution, the look of the figures, and some of the concepts that they've put up here that I went in on some of them. Not all of them by any means, but I went in on some of them, and some of them are going to go really nicely with that Robo Skull Mark II. So there is that, and you guys, I believe that's about all. Oh, one more thing, real quick. Me and the missus sat down, and we watched the newer version of The Stand. The Stand is my favorite book ever, definitely my favorite Stephen King book, and the new miniseries has a mostly fantastic cast, is done very, very well, but in the editing room, in my opinion, they just ruined it. Because the first, I guess, half of it looks like it's 9 episodes. We thought we were going to finish it today, because 8 seemed like it had to be the end, but there is a 9th episode. And it's just the first 4 or 5 episodes, they jump back and forth in time. Like, it starts in Boulder after Captain Trips has happened, and then goes back. It's very confusing, and I don't know why they did it that way, because it robs us of the opportunity to really get to know the characters and to see them interact. And you get that in the, I guess present day is not the way to say it, but in the Boulder timeline. But it just was chopped to shit in the editing room. Very competently done. The story is great. They changed a couple of things that I actually like quite a bit. But overall, it is very, very true to the book. It's just the narrative is a mess. And I wish they hadn't done it that way. And I would love it if there was a cut out there that moved in a linear fashion from the first scene of Captain Trips all the way through the very end. So it's on Paramount Plus. I'm not saying don't watch it. I'm saying be prepared to be very, very frustrated by the decisions that are made. But if they had just done it in order, told the story as it should have been told, it would definitely outshine the older Stand miniseries, which is saying something, because I think for its time it was very well done, especially for being on network television. This one could have gone further with a lot of things and didn't, which was a little disappointing, because when I was younger and that first Stand came out, what was it, 96? I think it was either 92 or 96. I'm not positive which one it was, but whatever it was, I was disappointed at how tame some of the things seemed, because Las Vegas is supposed to be just the Sodom and Gomorrah, this land of debauchery, and they sort of portrayed that as much as they could on network TV. Here, they do go further. You do see a lot of wild stuff, but I think they could have pushed it even a little bit further than they did. And normally, I'm not one. You guys, if you've been listening for any amount of time, you know this about me. I'm not one who wants things to be edgy or dirty or smutty just for the sake of it. But in this instance, it's in service of telling the story and demonstrating the extreme differences between Mother Abigail's people and Randall Flagg's people. So I do actually think it's important to go there in this. And they do, look, don't get me wrong, they go there a little bit, but I think they could have gone there more and told the story a lot better. So they're judge it for yourself, see what you think. Join the Needless Things podcast Facebook group. You can tell us what you think there, or follow Needless Things on Twitter. And if you want to tweet at us what you think of The Stand, if you want to invest 9 hours of your life into that, which if you're a Stephen King fanatic, you're going to, or possibly already have. So there you go. And now, to keep it on that horror note, it is time to roll back the clock to DragonCon 2021, where we recorded this panel in front of a live, packed room for the DragonCon horror track. We had a blast talking about wolves, specifically the wolves of 1981.
It's 5:30, so we're going to go ahead and start the panel. Welcome, everybody, to the DragonCon Horror Track, where we're going to be talking about 1981, Year in Werewolves. Before we get started, just a few bits of business. One, if you can, please donate to the charity for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Metro Atlanta. If you have any spare change, it really helps out. We love supporting great causes like this. And also, we will have to clear out the room pretty quickly at 6:30 for the next panel. Just a bit of word of warning.
Just like that.
Perfect example. Such a good Samaritan, yes. And we'll be introducing him in a moment. Let's go ahead. We'll go down the panel here to introduce our panelists. I'll just start. I'm the moderator, Thomas Mariani. I do a podcast called Double Edge Double Bill. I am blatantly advertising on my mask. And it's a podcast where we cover a good and a bad movie every single week. We're part of the ESO network, who has a great presence around here. But let's keep going down the line.
I'm Christopher G. Moore. I'm a horror filmmaker. My newest film, Backward Creep, is currently on the film festival circuit, and we're going to make that into a feature film. I also did a segment for an upcoming travel horror anthology called Worst Laid Plans that'll be released sometime next year. I'm also a podcaster with Horror News, with the Gruesome Magazine people. I do Horror News Radio as well as Heroes and Droids.
I'm Ryan Cadaver. I'm the vocalist for the horror rock band The Casket Creatures. I'm also part of the Needless Commentary team and part of the Big Damn Game Show. And I'm excited to be here.
I am Nicole Cadaver, horror geek, podcaster, part of the Needless Commentary team. I also run a podcast called Caught Dead Watching about terrible movies, mostly horror, but sometimes we go into action as well. And also part of the Big Dan Game Show, etc.
I'm Dave West. I do the Needless Things podcast and the Needless Things YouTube channel. Please check them out. Toys, movies, music, and all manner of pop culture dorkery.
Yes, and so today with the 1981, we'll specifically be talking about An American Werewolf in London, The Howling, and Wolfen. I'm sorry, Full Moon High fans, we won't be talking about that this evening. But I did just want to get a quick show of hands here. Who here has seen American Werewolf in London?
Okay.
Oh, yes. Now, who here has seen The Howling? Yeah, all right. Who here has seen Wolfen? Oh, okay. More than I expected, but it's pretty clear that's at least the lesser seen of the three. And that's what I'm kind of curious, so for everybody here, what is your experience with all three of these movies? Which one did you see first, and which ones maybe are you more partial to than the others? Start down the line here, Christopher.
I'm not sure which one I saw first. I mean, I know I saw all three of them. Wolfen is definitely my least favorite. I had issues with it. It feels like the least werewolf-y type film, and it annoyed me. But I was a big fan of The Howling, and of course American Werewolf in London. I mean, The Howling and Werewolf in London, which definitely have a connection effects artist-wise, but the effects in it are so great. And I also love that they both have their own elements of comedy as someone who's a huge fan of horror comedy. So, and they sort of walk that line, and they're able to create a tone that can be both frightening as well as comedic. Although I feel like the Howling's probably more comedic than scary. But yeah, they're both great films. Yeah, Wolfen's a weird bird, but it has its moments. But definitely my least favorite. It always annoyed me when I was younger.
Yeah, American Werewolf was in London was definitely the first one I saw out of the bunch. But yeah, obviously love the Howling. Wolfen I actually watched for this panel. It was the only one that I hadn't seen. And I was like, this is really good, but maybe not for me. But as far as the comedy sensibilities of American Werewolf in London and the Howling, those have always been my jams. As a fan of somebody who, like, I'm a fan of, like, kind of hokey, like, goofy horror, and, some of these completely work for me.
The first one I saw was American Werewolf, and it's my favorite of the three, which I think is probably a pretty common opinion. Love the Howling. I saw Wolfen years ago, and it didn't really grab me. Didn't remember it super well. So over the past month or so, I've actually watched it again twice, and I just kind of feel the same about it. Like, it's hard for me to sit down and put 100% focus into watching it. I don't know why. It can't. I get very ADD out when I'm watching it. I have trouble investing in it.
Well, gee willikers, I'm glad I am here to defend the honor of the great Wolfen, featuring naked Edward James Olmos and the phenomenal Gregory Hines. You people are heathens. I'm just kidding. Wolfen's not really all that great. I saw An American Werewolf in London first. It was one of the earlier horror movies that I saw. I saw it at that age where you feel like really cool, like, ooh, I'm sneaking watching something I probably shouldn't be watching. And then like halfway through, you're like, I shouldn't be watching this. I shouldn't be watching this. And then Howling, for a long time, kind of escaped me for some reason. And I loved werewolves. And I don't know how the Howling, and I mean, I've seen it, I saw it like 20 years ago or whatever, but I'm an old man, so that was late in life for me. And rewatching the Howling, I was reminded of why I don't watch the Howling that often. But we'll talk about that. That's what we're here for.
We will. And I mean, for me, I think it's a similar story where I definitely watched American Werewolf in London first. My dad loved showing me horror comedies. That was a favorite of his. And it was another great story of, I can let you watch all this horrible gore, but the moment, like, Jenny Agutter and David Naughton have, like, that sex montage, it's like, nope, can't see any of this. But wait, he'll get decapitated, you're fine. You're fine, you're like 7. You're cool with that. Yeah. But then, like, the Howling I remember getting into because I loved Gremlins as a kid. And I became, like, a big Joe Dante person. And I was like, I gotta, like, look at his other movies. And it's so weird how the Howling is, like, the next step, his next movie, pretty much, as Gremlins. It's just such a weird, like, connecting point. There's a bit more of this adult thing, which I think comes from John Sayles. So he'd also written, like, Piranha and was a really great sort of, like, genre social satire kind of director. And similarly, I had not seen Wolfen. And I think Wolfen is fascinating for a few things. I think particularly the Steadicam, which it was an early adopter of. A lot of the sort of POV camera stuff of the werewolf stuff's interesting. And there's a few people like Gregory Hines is mentioned. Love Gregory Hines. Also Tom Noonan. Like, there's a scene where the two of them are looking over, like, the cadaver remains.
Oh,
like,
that's
why
a
isn't
great
this the movie?
Yeah.
This should be
that
the
was
buddy
a
cop
really,
movie,
yeah.
basically, between these two. Instead of Albert Finney and his very bored face.
Yeah, like, I watched The Wolfen, and I'm like, I can see that this is a good movie. Like, I can recognize that. And I feel like I should like it a lot more than I do. I like Albert Finney. Gregory Hines is amazing. The opening scene is fantastic. The camera work is really good. The gore is great. The POV shots are all really good. There's so many good things about it. It's just like a stew that doesn't quite work for me. I don't know.
I think if it had been an episode of Kolchak, it would have been a lot better.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even kidding. Darren McGavin rather than Albert Finney.
Yeah.
I love
great.
the separate elements of it, and I know we're probably going to talk about Naked Edward James Olmos.
Yes.
But beyond even just talking about him running around with his wiener out, like that but his performance in that is really good. He's kind of like faking the werewolf thing, without any sort of werewolf transformation, and it's a really amazing moment. Nakedness aside, and the fact that he's performing that whole thing naked, it should be a movie that I love more. But it's like I like all these elements of it, but I just can't.
Well,
I don't know. I don't know.
I think as film viewers, as people who love horror, I think really the biggest challenge of that movie is that it does so often get related to the werewolf genre.
Yeah, but that's
so that incredible scene where he's doing the fake transformation because it's what Albert Finney expects, it's what the audience expects, and then they don't deliver. You're disappointed. You can't help but be disappointed. But that's not the point. The point is that it doesn't do that, and that it is a different thing. And I think, maybe 5 years from now when I go back and watch it again, I'll appreciate that a little bit more.
And normally I'm all for, like, subverting my expectations and doing something different, but I don't know why.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, with all three of these movies, there's a lot of nudity involved anyway.
Well,
yay, 80s!
Let's also mention we get to see Albert Finney's ass as well, okay?
So that's true.
Let's give it up for Albert Finney's ass. No, don't clap that.
Lots of male nudity.
No, well,
I love it.
I will say it's. I mean, the cinematography in it. There's an art installation fetish in this film, where it's a lot of shots behind art, and it's shot really well.
Yeah.
But then it's just weird things. You have these weird things where people in this sort of like room typing on computers and looking at video screens, and it's like, what is happening here?
It goes a little too long.
Yeah, and then you go from like these beautiful shots to where it's like the early thermography that they used in the Predator stuff.
Yeah.
But it looks like the really bad filter you used to have in those old video cameras that will do a negative effect. And it sort of makes it feel like you're watching video, and it kind of takes you out of it.
It's a little cheap.
So it's like it's a smattering of so many things that doesn't work. But at the same time, I will say there's some really great dialogue pieces. There's one piece where what's his name from White Knights?
Gregory Hines.
Gregory Hines, where he talks about like when you cut a person's head off, they could still be cognizant for like a minute. And it's a really creepy scene and really well written. And those are the scenes that had me like really interested. Other than the weird mystical wolves that show up. And I think that's what I was kind of very disappointed. I don't want to see wolves. I want to see werewolves.
Yeah.
So
it's really smart wolves.
True. I am curious with this in terms of, we're talking about a lot of expectations that Wolfen kind of broke. What are sort of your expectations for a werewolf movie? Especially, like, it's not as common a horror genre. We don't get, I think, mainly because, quite frankly, to do it in the American Werewolf or Howling way, it's a lot more expensive. As opposed to vampires or whatever zombies that you get down. It doesn't. What do you guys think makes a good werewolf movie, and what are some maybe examples from these three movies that you might want to spotlight that really exemplify what you like about werewolf movies?
I think you have to have an innocent victim. You have to have somebody, infected with lycanthropy that you feel for, that you have a connection with, so that you're seeing their, it's kind of like the Hulk story. We feel bad for Bruce Banner because of what happens to him when he turns into the Hulk, and the werewolf story is kind of a similar thing. That you've got to have a protagonist that the audience has sympathy for what they're going through and doesn't want to see this horrible thing, and the guilt that they're going to have to deal with over whatever they do while they're a wolf.
I think that a good werewolf story is kind of expanding on what you said. It's exploring our animalistic side, which everyone has. So you take a protagonist who's a good normal person, and then you put them in this extraordinary circumstances, and you kind of strip away their conscious and their understanding right from wrong, and you just put them in this primal animalistic place, and kind of like let them just become violent. And a lot of the things in the Howling are like hypersexual, hyper-violent, things like that. So it's just really exploring our deepest, most animalistic place inside of us.
For me, great werewolf movies is like it all comes down to how the creature actually ends up looking, because
Yes.
there's so many of them where they build it up and build it up and build it up. And then you see the werewolf and you're like, really? That's it?
It's like a guy
Are
with a
you
fake
kidding
beard.
me? Yeah. But thankfully, these two movies specifically, like, incredible, mind-blowing, game-changing.
Well, I mean, I know me. I just want to see a really great transformation.
Yeah.
And as a filmmaker, I know how hard it is. I know some people that tried to make short films, and it's hard to. Even the show Creepshow had like a werewolf transformation. They just flipped the pages in the comics instead of actually showing it. But yeah, I mean, I think there was a show on Netflix, Eli Roth, where people just bursted out of their skin. So it's always very interesting when you can put some kind of interesting spin on it, and that's what I love. I mean, those two films in the 80s really broke ground when it came to creating effects to make that seem real, and a lot of that's due through editing, I mean, when you're working with an effects guy, you have to make sure shots sell that effects thing, because not everything's going to work as well, and you have to use so many different formats to make it all meld together.
I think it's also interesting to examine, we've got American Werewolf in London, you've got Rick Baker. Rick Baker was actually signed on to the Howling initially because he had been going to work on American Werewolf for years and years and years, and it wasn't getting made, so he was approached about the Howling, and he signed on to that. And then they came to him and said, oh, hey, we're finally making it. And so he put the Howling in the hands of his apprentice, essentially, and then went to work on American Werewolf. So you kind of see two different styles of doing the transformation that are somewhat not similar, but then they go different ways. Where in the Howling you've got the airbags under the skin, and everything is very bulging,
pulsating,
and it's very alien feeling and really weird, and then obviously I think probably the greatest werewolf transformation ever on film is American Werewolf in London. I don't know that anybody would even argue with me on that one, but if you go back and watch The Howling, that transformation is phenomenal as well. It's just, to me, it's more disturbing because it's but I think it's kind of cool to see sort of similar styles that diverge in those two different transformations.
Yeah, shout out to Rob Bottin, I believe.
Yeah.
So the Howling is incredible as well. One of the right after this, he would do The Thing special effects. But yeah, I think Dave really hit it on the head in terms of that feeling of regret and sort of that empathy that you would have toward the protagonist, which I think is done so well with David Naughton, who's just this kid going backpacking with his friend, and then his friend dies and he becomes a werewolf. There's so much there, whereas I think The Howling kind of tries to play it a bit in the middle where I love Dee Wallace. I think she's what kind of holds that movie together.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, there's also the mystery element, which I think is what really kind of sinks Wolfen, and how much we don't really have as much an emotional attachment to the people who do become werewolves, which is a bummer, because I like at least the idea of these natives who have been just kind of forgotten by New York, kind of seeking vengeance in this way. I think it's an interesting idea, but it's really sidelined for Albert Finney and that one, his female partner, who are just kind of have this whirlwind romance.
That comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's what is happening?
I think you meant to say unbelievable romance.
Well, yeah. He's looking in her apartment for something, and then they hook up, and I'm like, what is happening? This doesn't happen
Did I
in real
miss
life.
a scene? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I was going to say something. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of interesting to see. I mean, it's also kind of interesting to see how Howling and American Werewolf treat their werewolves differently. In Howling, you have people that are glad to be werewolves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
American Werewolf, you have this guy who doesn't want to be, or doesn't even know what's happening. So it's kind of interesting to see that sort of two different styles of the werewolf and how they're affected by it.
What would you guys say is maybe the biggest similarity you find in these three movies? What's a connecting thread that I think kind of at least would connect them beyond obviously just the fact that they're werewolves? Maybe some thematic stuff, or even some of the maybe uses of characters or humor that you might have noticed that connects the three of them.
Goofy detectives, I guess, or goofy investigators, because there's these people working for a TV station. They're just going into a crime scene. before the police get there. But I mean, they're all investigating, trying to find certain things out, and there's always a element of humor with some of the people involved with it. You know, I mean, like
even in Wolfen, it's like gallows humor.
Yeah, it's more morbid. But then you have American Werewolf in London, where there's that one guy who has the sidekick who's always knocking shit over and and adding a little bit of humor probably when there doesn't need to be. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the main thing. Is like there seems to be the investigative part where they're trying to find out what's happening. I know that like the Howling, they kind of marketed it initially without it being a werewolf film. It was almost more like a slasher film trying to find out this killer, and to where a lot of people didn't know that it was a werewolf film until they had to like. I think there was one point where they tried to market it along with slasher films. They're like, no, this is a werewolf film, because in the beginning you don't sort of know what's going on.
I think. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say. I think one similarity that's obvious to me is that they're werewolf movies that are set in contemporary times. Which, I mean, a lot of times werewolf movies are period pieces.
Yeah.
I just think that that's a really cool take on it, and it provides for more interesting stories.
All three of them are about being displaced in society. American Werewolf in London. David is not in his home country. He's very isolated and alone here. You know, he makes the one connection with the nurse, but think about, being in a different place and experiencing this horrifying thing. The Howling, you have this whole tribe of people who are who have involuntarily displaced themselves from society because of their unique natures.
And also, I think you have, Dee Wallace. Karen is displaced by this trauma that she's been through. So that's
absolutely.
Where she's struggling with, this very real, terrifying experience that she had
of meeting Robert Picato.
Yes.
And then, finally, Wolfen obviously is the most blatant one of this, whole species that is in New York and unrecognized by the world at large.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think another one we kind of have mentioned offhand is just these movies have weird casts. But these people just show up suddenly. Like obviously, like in Joe Dante has done that plenty of times, where like this is an early Joe Dante, but it's like John Carradine shows up, or Patrick McNee. Some people like, or my favorite is the sort of Deus Ex Machina of the movie is played by Dennis Dugan, who, if you don't know, would later go on to direct a bunch of Adam Sandler movies.
Weird.
The main guy who shoots down all the werewolves is the guy who directed like Jack and Jill and Grown Ups.
And also, you can't forget Dick Miller,
Of
who
course.
plays a Walter Paisley for, I think, the third out of 6 or 7 times.
Yeah, this is the character from Bucket of Blood.
Yeah. He actually apparently owned that name. He had a copyright on the name Walter Paisley. So, for S's and G's, he had played like 6 or 7 different characters named Walter Paisley, or something close to Walter Paisley.
Well, a lot of the characters in The Howling were named after directors who directed werewolf films.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So,
And even Roger Corman, who directed Bucket of Blood, shows up and is the guy that gets in the telephone booth.
Well, I think like Joe Dante is like your first like fanboy direct movie maker. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's kind of more common now with our generation that had grew up with these, but like he was like a really early like fan making movies. So he wanted to put all those nods in there.
Mick Garris shows up in the very end when they're going through different people. They're responding to the thing that happens on the television.
Well, that's another thing I think is that these, especially with Dante and John Landis, who directed American Werewolf in London, they're the first directors to come from the generation that was raised on television. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of that. Not so much with, I forgot the director of Wolfen, but he's another weird case where like his only other movie before this was the Woodstock documentary.
Michael Wadley, who did a lot of like. It makes sense that he directed Wolfen because if you look, he did a lot of like socially relevant documentaries.
Yeah.
So it fits, even though it's different. It's not a documentary. It fits into his resume.
And never did anything after Wolfen, pretty much.
Which I mean, maybe he decided I don't like making movies.
It's kind of like Wolfen. It fits, but it doesn't.
Yeah,
it fits, but it's odd.
Absolutely.
For sure. I guess we can open this up, by the way, if anybody in the audience has any comments or questions. Yeah.
American Werewolf in London, I think, is just so great and done on so many great levels that like every werewolf movie after that just pales in comparison. It's almost, unless you have something really fresh, it's nearly pointless to make a werewolf movie because that movie is so good.
Yeah, there aren't as many werewolf movies post this year that I think really stand out. There's like ones I would say probably my favorite post this is like a Ginger Snaps.
Yeah.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Which also like brought something interesting.
Well, and Dog Soldiers.
Dog Soldiers.
Yeah, Dog
absolutely.
Soldiers. I think Dog Soldiers is probably my favorite werewolf movie.
But every werewolf movie going forward will always be compared to
reference to
American
these.
Werewolf in London.
Yeah. 100%.
Yes, and The Howling, but you know.
Although, if you look at it, American Werewolf London also has the weird, like nightmare sequences and
Yes,
stuff
the
that
best.
make it a little bit different than your normal like straight
Yeah.
story. I mean, when you have like sort of Nazi creatures machine gunning his family down, that's a very odd thing to throw.
Yeah.
So it not only does it tell like a normal story, but at the same time it incorporates these weird like visions. I mean, his friend keeps showing up and decaying every time he sees it. You
Well,
know?
when I was a kid, that stuff is what scared me more than the werewolf.
Yeah,
stories.
yeah.
Like that was the part of the movie where I said I shouldn't be watching this. Like that
Yeah.
was it, and I love that stuff was incorporated in that way because it is essentially a movie built around one werewolf transformation scene.
Yeah.
That's it. So to creatively come up with more for the plot, to give him those nightmare visions, to have his best friend as sort of his spirit guide, which by the way, your best buddy telling you constantly, you gotta kill yourself, pal.
Yeah, it's awful.
It's a little
And
rough.
It's kind
And
of
also trying to take that toast, man.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
your hospital toast. Don't try to take that with your neck flap.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess to expand the mythology that, you know, these people can't die, that your victims can't die
Right.
until you die. So I love that aspect that adds that extra little tinge of horror to it that makes it more than just a normal werewolf film.
Yeah.
And guilt and empathy. Yeah.
But there's also just a real humor that I do love, particularly with like the sequence in the porn theater, where it's all the various victims that are arguing with Griffin Dunn and David
Yes.
Morse.
Howling,
It's
yeah.
such a darkly funny bit in American Werewolf.
Oh, yeah.
Just like, how can I do it? Drowning. All this other stuff, like so many like still perfect little bits. Even like when I think they kind of create the one jump scare where like you close the mirror in the bathroom. That was like an early example of it. And like the whole thing with Griffin Dunn having like the little Mickey Mouse toy. It was like, hi, David.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was thinking, did Disney give them rights to use that?
Or especially that cut in the middle of the horrific giant werewolf transformation. Just the cut to the little toy looking over at David Dunn.
All the,
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
it is kind of weird that we have two different porn places in both of the Howling and
yeah, the beginning of the
Yeah,
Howling.
prominently in each movie.
which the porn place that in the Howling is actually a real porn place.
Yeah.
Yes.
And she
And,
was very.
She's very uncomfortable. I think she's from like the Midwest.
She's
Never
from
been one of those.
Kansas, and
Yeah.
she just seems she's E.T.'s mom, you know, which she ends up being the next year. But you know, you just get that feeling from Dee Wallace of like innocence and almost purity, and so you throwing her. And the opening sequence of The Howling is so like
I love it.
visceral because you can tell that she's so frightened and out of place. And she's just 100% in that moment and in that role. And I saw an interview with her where she's extremely uncomfortable about being in the porn store. And I don't think that she had ever been in an environment like that before. And you know, but that comes across in her performance. And I think that's why she works in that role.
Yes.
Is because you just feel her being, you know, just very damaged by this entire experience.
And how much it also puts you in her perspective, where like how dark that room is.
Yes.
And how like the only glimpses you see of Picardo are very small, but it's just like it really shows like you feel that unease with her as you're trapped in this little environment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Comparing what came after, did An American Werewolf in Paris do anything better than London?
No.
No.
Next question.
I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge if you like me are tracking the continuity of R.J. Fletcher, Kevin McCarthy appears in The Howling, and clearly he worked for Channel 6 before becoming the CEO of Channel 8. And if you get that reference, you are my friend.
Yeah, the follow-ups to these movies are interesting, particularly how The Howling has like how many sequels?
Oh yeah.
Just like way too many. And the only one worth watching is 2 with Christopher Lee, which is stellar.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with like, okay, we can now do transformations in CGI, and it seems too CGI, and it makes you kind of miss those practical effects transformations.
Absolutely.
So I think that was probably the main issue. It's like, and now we can have the
marsupials.
werewolf, yeah. Oh, marsupials, yeah. Let's not even go there. Put your head in his pocket. But yeah, I think that's the main issue. It's like when you compare that, it's sort of like what they did with the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, to where they do a lot of more CGI stuff, and it doesn't compare to seeing like
It has no
some of the
punch.
physical
It sucks.
stuff. Yeah.
And I'm not anti-CGI
No.
at all, but I think the combination of CGI and practical is the way to go.
That's better, yeah.
Yeah.
Very early CGI here too. We're talking like it's hard to get scared from something that looks like it came off a PlayStation 1 game.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
true.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know. Have you ever seen Lawnmower Man? That's scary, right?
True terror.
Yeah.
True terror.
Scary for a different reason.
Yeah.
Yep.
So looking at that, thinking about how werewolves have such a connection to like the urban setting, or particularly with what we saw with like American Werewolf in London, and looking at Wolfen, like why don't we think more werewolf movies are made today? Like considering there's so much you can tell with like werewolves in our modern society, and connecting it to this urban reality, why don't we see more of those things?
I think it's budget.
Yeah.
Quite, because like it when we have this expectation that's set by like an American Werewolf in London or Howling of just like, oh, a great transformation sequence, and most movies, like unless you have a solid amount of money, can't quite deliver that, and if they do, they're going to do it with CG that looks bad anyway. I think a lot of them are just like kind of fearful, as opposed to like a vampire movie, super cheap to do. A zombie movie, Lord knows how many of those just come out every year that are like super cheap. I think werewolf movies are like very selective, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think a werewolf movie has to deliver with a good monster. Whereas in some other, like vampire, zombie, stuff like that, you can be a little cheesy and still the movie can still work. But I mean, I'm sure that we've all seen some really cheesy werewolf movies and really cheesy werewolf transformations. And if you aren't able to deliver that creature, you know, your whole movie's kind of hinging on that, as opposed to maybe some other subgenres.
Well, and also with vampires can talk. With zombie movies, you have your group of protagonists surviving against the zombies. With a werewolf movie, unless it's Teen Wolf, your protagonist spends a portion of that time unable to deliver dialogue, and I think, and you could get creative. There are a lot of options for doing cool werewolf stuff, but everything has to go through the Hollywood system, and I think in general it's kind of difficult to tell a different, interesting werewolf story. It essentially does have to be poor, innocent person gets turned into a werewolf. Like, and I'm not saying there are not other options, but again, we go through Hollywood with this stuff, and getting too out there, which is one of the things that I respect the heck out of for the Howling franchise, is they got wacky.
Oh, they went
yeah.
out there
They
and
went
then
way out there. And I do think if we want more modern werewolf stories, that somebody with a vision is going to have to do something like that, or else we're just going to get remakes of The Wolfman, American Werewolf in London, whatever.
yeah.
I think
But
American
not that I'm
Werewolf.
against those
Yeah.
things.
Yes?
I'm just curious why you think the werewolf has to be the protagonist. Could he be a force
That's very true.
opposing our hero, something our hero has to overcome? Couldn't you use the werewolf to symbolize something, say, like a sexual predator, and your main character could be female, who's in opposition to this?
Well, I think that the Howling kind
Yeah,
of
it's
does
definitely
that.
Right.
With
the protagonist, and I don't agree that David in American Werewolf is our protagonist. I would argue that Jenny Agutter is the protagonist in that film, because she's the one who makes that connection with him and lives to regret it, because she's kind of the hero in the story, and he is not at all a hero. If he was a hero, he would have killed himself like his friend told him to.
Well, I
I don't think protagonist means hero,
Yeah.
Protagonist is the person you identify with. And
but
are
it
we-
doesn't mean hero.
But are we supposed to identify with him?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
And this is what you have to look at. If I were in his role, I wouldn't just immediately say, well,
just got to dust myself, no problem. I'd struggle and I'd suffer. I'd go through what he went through. And yes, if we're watching something idealistic, sure, we want the hero to do the right thing, but then that's a pretty short damn movie, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, and at the same time, what I do like about that movie, though, is that they're able to give, like, a Jenny Gunter a solid amount of character. Like, she could be a lot more disposable in worse hands, but I think her performance in particular makes, like, him even more unwilling to, like, potentially do that, because she's such a nice, charming person that he has, like, a really solid connection with. I think that makes what we're talking about, where, like, his regret about the sort of, like, tug and pull that he has a lot more relatable, interesting in a way that makes him, I think, a really solid protagonist in that movie.
But I will say, you're right. The protagonist does not have to be the one who's infected, but I do think it's a common theme by most werewolf movies.
That goes back to the Wolfman from the Universal Monster movies. He's actually the main character. But I've always been fascinated by the idea of making him the monster and having the protagonist, the hero, be the person who's in opposition to that.
To me, like, that's very kind of what we have in the Howling, is she goes into this den of predators, essentially, and they're, again, hypersexual, hyper-violent, and we don't know what's going on with Karen until the very end, that she's actually turned or become a werewolf as well. So, I kind of feel like the Howling fills that role in a lot of ways.
Which, shout out also, we've mentioned it briefly, but Robert Picardo is unsettling in the Howling in a way that I just knew him from, like, it's like the funny assistant from Gremlins 2, or like I would show up on Star Trek as, like, the hologram guy, as opposed to in that movie, especially, like, when after he's been attacked, and you see him, like, the last time in his, like, half melted makeup, is astonishing. That's, like, really, really good stuff.
They could have made a movie just about him being just a serial killer.
Yeah.
It would have been great. Like, without even the werewolf element. He was so good at
Well, and there's a guy who's definitely not the protagonist. I mean, he's definitely a killer werewolf, and so it would, if you could have, like, a film where he's just the bad guy going after people, that would be very interesting and stuff.
What does he say? I'm going to light your world on fire, or...
Well, I do know that the line he says,
set your body on fire.
Oh, yeah.
It's so
creepy.
Well, he says the line like, here's a piece of my mind, or whatever. That was an improvised line. He made that up on the spot.
And it was like a joke too. It was like, ha ha, what would you say? Oh, here's a piece of my mind. And they were like, oh, no. Yeah, do that.
And I guess the distinction really for me, when you say werewolf movie, what comes to my mind is what I said, and if it turns into something else, where the werewolf, like where you're like a werewolf hunter movie or whatever, yes, werewolves are in it, but that's more of a monster movie. That's more of a there's to me a good werewolf movie needs that sympathetic angle, and I'm not saying there aren't awesome ones that is just folks fighting werewolves, but I like the drama that's presented by the conflict and by the struggle.
I just think you can create the drama without that. I understand what you're saying. I just think the drama could be with the people who are being victimized by the werewolf.
Right.
Sure, but then then to me, then it's no longer special, because that could be werewolves, it could be zombies, it could be fish people, it could be anything. And I'm not saying, again, it wouldn't be an awesome movie. I'd watch it, but that to me is a different kind of thing. That
Silver Bullet
isn't.
Yeah,
absolutely.
True.
Yeah, good point.
Except they had a horrible werewolf there.
but you had Corey Haim
and Gary
Busey.
Gary Busey, really.
Yeah, he's the star of that movie.
Yeah.
He's the star of
everything.
Any other? Yes, you.
We're focusing a lot on the Howling, so I'll just hurt me on that. But love all the like we talked about the gore and the pulsation of the transformation stuff. But then you get to the end, Dee Wallace changes and she looks like a teddy bear.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's so weird.
It is.
It's kind of cute.
But it lost me right there. I was like just at the end, I'm like.
It's like they didn't try. I agree.
No, but the point, it was intentional. Yes. Yeah. Because she was supposed to be the good werewolf, the one that because they don't need the full moon, right? Because they can transform at will. That you've got all these bad werewolves, and again, that movie is very like exploring like the id. So, you know, everybody at the colony is super into being a werewolf, right? So they want to tear stuff up. They want to delve into that animal side where she's fighting it. She doesn't want to. The only reason she transforms is to expose the werewolves to the world and to say that this is something that's real. So you're getting this transformation where she's not 100% in. She doesn't want to be it. She doesn't feel it. So she just gets little things and little blue eyes. Yeah.
Well, if you listen to I think even the bare bones Blu-ray that I got, it's got a lot of interviews and a commentary. And in one of the supplemental materials, they explained that was the intent because of what she was doing. Not that she was necessarily controlling what she looked like or anything, but just from an audience perspective, they wanted her werewolf to be more sympathetic, and the audience would be like, "Oh, don't shoot that! Oh, you know, that was the intent."
That part, like, especially after this last rewatch, like, that part does kind of bother me when she gets shot on TV. Like, it's like horrific.
Yeah.
Like, and everyone's just sitting there watching it, and like that scene gives me chills.
And it's definitely a commentary on
Cue werewolf aside,
the
it's
media
still
and you know, TV consumption generation and all that, where half the people watching it just go, "Oh, that's weird."
Yeah, the cynicism of oh, look what they can do with effects these days.
Yeah. Or even just being like,
And also,
and
like,
moving on.
at the station, they're just like, cut away, but like, they don't seem that freaked out. Like, I'd be way more freaked out. Like,
And yet
just
at the
saying.
same time, how that still is kind of relevant, where it's just like all that's missing is just like, oh, what they can do with deep fakes in this day and age. I think that's what's so interesting. It's a lot going in a lot better. And even like, I agree, I have some issues with that design, but even the lead up where she's just like, I want to show you something. The way that she's pulsating and stuff.
Well, I think when she has that tear go down, it makes it more impactful. But then although now I feel it's a non-canon Star Wars Ewok adventure.
It does look like an Ewok.
Now I know where Ewoks come from. They come from good werewolves.
The Howling Caravan of Courage.
And I do see your point, and I'm not trying to take away from that. She definitely is.
It's a little silly.
It's jarring because it is so different, but it was very intentional, and I think they wanted it to be super obvious that there's something different about her as opposed to them.
If anybody ever sees a little plush of her in a con dealer room, please let me know.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm also curious, since we're talking about the werewolf designs, I've heard some, at least back and forth, about like the Howling werewolf. Not the Howling one, but also what about American Werewolf in London? What do you guys think of like the actual final werewolf design, what we see of it?
I think it's incredible.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to ask you guys. Do you prefer a more Wolfen form, or do you like the big biped werewolves? I mean, I like both if they look good.
Yeah.
But I will say I prefer the Howling werewolf.
Well, I think because he can stand up on his two legs, that seems more scary to me than just crawling around. I mean, it's kind of creepy when the American Werewolf's going down the middle of the street.
He's very low to the ground.
But when you have this big, tall ass werewolf, I don't know, something about that is more scary to me.
I agree. So conceptually, I like the Howling better. The finished product, I like the American Werewolf better. But I like the upright canines. Terrifying. Giant standing wolf dog. Yeah,
I would say generally, but I think it's because like with the American Werewolf one, what creeps me out about it is like it's on four legs, so it feels like it could be a natural animal, but the face.
Oh god.
The face is unsettling.
There's nothing natural about that
creature.
thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and it's also the context of the setting where you have this giant beast running amok just out in public, out in the streets of London. It's why wasn't, and I'll take any opportunity I can to poop on this movie, Friday the 13th Part 8, that's what we wanted. We wanted Jason in Manhattan like that werewolf, because that set a standard for public chaos. Seeing this unnatural, horrifying thing, and granted we see people reacting to it more than we actually see it, but it is out there running through the subway, running through the streets. That movie becomes very intense at that point because you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know what that's capable of, and you don't know where the film is willing to take the carnage.
Well, that and a lot of people end up dying just because of the chaos involved with it. They're not even killed by the werewolf. People are like, there's like a person that goes through the window of their car.
That is director John Landis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who actually is the one who goes through the window.
Right. I think
really?
all four of these movies have such a great use of setting. I would say, like, even with a Wolfen, I love the stuff in the abandoned church. I think that's probably my favorite sequence.
That whole wasteland is, I wish they had made more use of that.
Right. The stuff about urban decay is fairly fascinating, but like you mentioned with the Piccadilly Circus sequence, where it's not just even the werewolf is attacking everybody, it's just that other chaos is going on, like people are flying out of cars, or like the double-decker buses and stuff like that, or even in the Howling also, even those eerie sort of redwood California forests also have just like this other natural thing where it's like, oh, it's not like the Wolfman on a set forest that we saw in the 40s.
Yeah.
It's this environment that feels like lived in and breathing, and you're just, wolves are a part of it, and they're bonking each other in the middle of it as well.
Also, talking about the setting, I just love the slaughtered lamb. I just love the. I want to be there and have a drink.
We have a little flag that hangs outside of our house. The slaughtered lamb like sign. It hangs in the front of our house.
If you ever, for those who've ever been to like Halloween Horror Nights, John Landis was actually helped him with that, and it felt like walking onto the set.
It was incredible.
Has anybody else here been through that haunt? It was incredible.
It was life-changing. And they did it. It was so good it won awards, and they did it 2 years in a row because it's literally walking through the movie.
Yeah.
It's incredible. You walk through the slaughtered lamb, you go into the moors, you go through the subways. It's incredible.
We had a comment in the back over there?
Do you think the things that we call campy now were intended to be viewed and remembered as like the whole image or part of the whole image of the movie, or were more of a consequence of making movies in that time? Because when I remember watching it as a kid, I remembered a scary movie, watching American Werewolf. But then watching it as an adult, I remember the campy scenes, but still the image in my head is a scary movie that has comic relief in it.
Well, I think American Werewolf is very much trying to do like that horror comedy balance. It's one of, I would argue, like I always say that like horror and comedy goes so well together because like both describe like either scare or comedy sequences as gags. So I think they're definitely, with that particular movie, trying to do it a bit more. I think Howling, and especially Wolfen, maybe suffer a bit more because they're being slightly more serious, but even Howling has a couple moments like that. Wolfen, though, is like a dead serious one. I think that's where some of the more creative things. And even Howling has like some problems. Like my biggest thing with the designs in that is just the few moments of like stop motion. It looked really rough. Like
the literal animation when during the mating scene.
Yes.
Where it's literally just animated. Yeah. But because they really had no other way to do it.
Right.
Well, the stop motion was supposed to be a bigger part, and they even realized this does not look good. So they put it over a dissolve so you don't really see it.
Oh, yeah, because there's a whole scene, and you can find it online, of after they set the barn on fire, of stop-motion werewolves, like, wallowing around in the fire that they just had to cut because it just didn't work. But it's awesome to see.
Also, the big transformation scene, the reason it's so long is when they were selling the pitch of the people that were like giving the money, they're like, "Hey, this looks great. Don't edit it at all." Because I think Joe Dante just recently was on a podcast talking about it, and so it always irks him that he could edit it. So you have this long sequence where she keeps looking at him.
Right.
She could have run away a long time ago.
Know, that's what I'm always thinking. I'm like, Dee, baby, honey, he's busy now.
At least try.
Get out.
Because they were trying to show off the great special effects, but that scene is so long.
It's like 3 minutes.
It's like the steamroller scene in Austin Powers.
Yeah, that's basically, yeah.
You forget that she's there. Every once in a while it cuts back to her and she's like... And I'm like...
I mean, granted, she does deal with shock issues, so I guess...
Yeah. That's true. She's
give her
traumatized.
that much,
so, I mean, maybe she is literally just paralyzed. I can buy that. I'll accept that.
Okay.
And I think that's part of why I think the American Werewolf sequence works so well is because David, like, every time, even in the porn theater, he's basically alone.
Yeah.
No one is going to help him. He is, like, stuck in a situation despite how much he pleads for help. I love that it's like that happens right after a very funny montage of him just like, I don't know what the hell to do in this place. I'm alone. I have nothing to do here. And then the moment he has something to do, it's, I'm horribly being destroyed by my own body, just transforming into a werewolf.
Both of those transformations from those movies seem so incredibly painful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, the sound design in the Howling transformation is so disturbing to me. It sounds like sticks breaking.
Yeah.
And it's like he's pulsating and he's making these popping noises. Mm-hmm. Oh, it makes my skin crawl.
Any other people in the audience, comments, questions, maybe?
Any particular reason why you think this year was the year that we got this many werewolf movies? Like, was there something particularly within the zeitgeist that made that important?
That's a good question. I've been thinking about it since our beloved track director put this one together. There's got to be something, but I don't know.
I think part of it is probably because we're doing this on like the 40th anniversary of these movies coming out. On this year that this movie came out, like 40 years ago, was the Wolfen. So I think it's a part of like what we were talking about earlier with like these are guys that were raised on television, or in certain cases like the cheaper stations would run stuff like the Wolfen and other like werewolf movies, or even they mentioned what's the name of the Oliver Reed one? The Curse of the Werewolf, right?
Curse of the Werewolf.
That was even like it's the 20th anniversary of that as well. So I think it's sort of like this weird cultural thing that almost comes up like every generation. It's just like, oh, how about a werewolf story? That's even, I think, when we get to something like Ginger Snaps, that's about 20 years after this.
Yeah.
So I think it's sort of like a cyclical thing, almost like cycles of, werewolf transformation or the moon and stuff. I feel like just werewolf things they come up like there's a defining one in a generation, then not a lot of imitators. And I'm just like, well, werewolf, let's do another one of those.
Although I'll say I saw Werewolves Within, and that's probably one of my favorite ones I've seen recently. Although I'm a big fan of horror comedies in general, and they do a little bit of transformation in there that kind of works for that specific scene. But because it's one of those things like murder mysteries where who's the werewolf type thing.
It's like Clue with werewolves.
Werewolves.
Well, it's based on the video game of the same thing. You know, like when people play Werewolf in the Halls and sort of like that. But it's a very interesting take on that, sort of like Ready or Not or Knives Out I think the reviewers called it Claws Out, but because you have all these group of like character actors and it's very comedic.
Yeah.
But that's probably one of my favorite ones. And again, they did a pretty good job with the transformation. It wasn't on the level of anything we're talking about, but still it kind of worked for that.
Yeah,
movie.
if anybody hasn't seen that one, I think it's streaming. I can't remember, but it's absolutely great.
Werewolves we're talking about?
Oh, Werewolves Within. Yeah,
it's fantastic.
It's definitely more comedy. It's definitely more. It's sort of a.
I love Sam Richardson. He's amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of like Fargo or Northern Exposure meets Werewolf. So.
Yeah.
Have you seen the werewolf and what we do in the shadows? They're basically just a bunch of dumb dogs.
The Swearwolves.
Yeah. Swearwolves, yes.
Yeah.
For sure, those are fun. Another one that we haven't even mentioned, but shout out to Trick or Treat's werewolves.
Oh yeah.
I think that's a great example of especially where they just they rip off their own skin.
Yeah.
And
well, I also because I love the misdirection in Trick or Treat.
Yeah.
Where you think it's kind of like this woman coming of age thing, which it kind of is, but it's in a very different way than you have expected, and then all of a sudden, and it's a fantastic transformation. I love it, and that's a really good use of what I imagine was practical and CGI combined because they look really good.
Yeah. Well, what in terms of I guess some of these follow-ups that have it, what do you think are the lessons to take from An American Werewolf, Howling, or even a Wolfen that other werewolf movies in the future kind of need to remember when they're kind of what are maybe some of the cardinal things these movies do well or not that other ones should follow up with?
I mean, I guess it comes down to your effects can be amazing, but you still have to have a pretty good story and some good characters to sort of care about that go through this transformation, this kind of issue. So I think there needs to be a good combo there because, I think the reason these movies kind of stand the test of time, especially with the Howling and definitely American Werewolf, is because of the characters like Naughton or McNaughton?
David Naughton.
David Naughton.
Yeah.
It's just his him going between being goofy and being distressed and stuff. You see him as a normal human being who's dealing with this issue and having to deal with it, and how is he going to go about doing it? And so I think that's what it comes down to. Definitely making sure, casting-wise, but by the way, in Wolfen, I think they were actually looking at Dustin Hoffman to play the role that Albert Finney played. But yeah, it comes down to the definitely story, character, because there needs to be something that gives you a reason to have that transformation happen, because otherwise you're just known for having a good effects scene as opposed to having an overall great film.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like some other horror genres or subgenres. You can kind of have throwaway characters that you don't really care about. that aren't well developed because you're leaning on some other element. But in a werewolf movie, I think they're very character-driven stories. They have to be successful, and they have to be creature-driven stories. So I think maybe that answers why we don't see more of them, because they have to be a little deeper to work, I think.
I don't really have anything to add. I think that's all.
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much covers it.
Also, does anybody, because we have kind of all said that, Wolfen's not our favorite of this. If Wolfen didn't come out in 1981, do you think that the world would look at it differently? Because we had these two amazing werewolf movies, and then we had a spooky wolf movie.
I think people just maybe wouldn't even glom onto it at all, because the only way I knew about Wolfen at all was like, 1981 was a year of werewolves because of the other two movies.
Yeah.
It was like lumped in. I think
you might be right. Yeah.
That's what's gotten at least some attention, and why we all had our various issues obviously with the movie, but I think at least it's interesting that it takes this different track.
Yeah.
And that it does have some of these more interesting things. Like shout out to especially in Wolfen, like you mentioned, sort of the Steadicam shots are spectacular. Particularly this one that's along the Brooklyn Bridge. That I think is so stellar, and I think it's an example where I don't love every element of Wolfen, but still there's something fascinating, which I hope is what if anything else, these other werewolf movies I think need to take some of these basic tenets that we're talking about, but also not just try and do American Werewolf or Howling or any of these other things straight up.
Plus, they had Alfred Finney up on that bridge.
Yes.
And I was like, you couldn't do that unless you're Tom Cruise or something. I doubt any of these actors would be willing to do that.
I mean, Albert Finney would do his own stunts. I'm sure we could have gotten the 80s Mission Impossible franchise starring Albert Finney. Would have been spectacular.
It'd be the weirdest
I don't even think about that. Multiverse.
Any final comments maybe from the audience before we... Yes?
I just want to talk about this next question about why it's easy, why the werewolf is typically the protagonist. And in my opinion, I think it's easier to have it be the protagonist than the antagonist because they're inherently victims as well as victimizers, and you have to sympathize with them. So it's a little bit more difficult to write them as a compelling antagonist, someone who's going to beat up the villain, when they themselves are inherently suffering. And then, tying back to that was the difference in character design with the two different werewolves. The werewolves in the Howling are anthropomorphized physically and in their actions. They control when they turn into werewolves.
Yeah.
They are behind what they want to do. They decide. Whereas the form in American Werewolf London is more bestial. It's less anthropomorphized, and he's not in control.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because we didn't even touch on it. Is the fact that really, and again, that's what I think makes the Howling franchise so interesting, is that they do kind of shed a lot of the old tropes of being a werewolf. It's a very different thing, and they treat it really more as a species and less as an infection, I guess.
Yeah, more of a wolf pack as opposed to a lone wolf.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not going to try and say Howling 2 through 9 or however many there are. I'm not trying to say they're great movies. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. And again, they go in some wild directions with those movies. So if you haven't seen them, find them for the right price.
Yes.
But open your mind and check them out.
Yeah, Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf is one of my favorite titles of any movie.
Yes,
regardless
absolutely.
of the content, the title.
And then the marsupials?
Well, that's your marsupials. Like 5 or something?
Which one is...
I think it was 4.
Which one is Sybil Danning in?
I believe that's 2.
That's 2, okay.
It's 4.
Is it 4?
It's hard to keep them
I don't know.
Well,
you guys know how to use
we'll do a Howling franchise panel at some other point.
Yes.
Yes, I'm sure.
That's
I'm
scary.
sure. But I guess we're getting to the end here, so let's do some quick plugs from everybody. I'll just briefly say, like I said, Double Edge Double Bill is my podcast where we cover a good and a bad movie randomly selected every week. We're part of the ESO Network. You can find us at DEDBpod on Facebook and Twitter. I also have my own Twitter at NotTheWho'sTommy. I do some writing at film-cred.com.
You can follow my social medias mainly on I Like Films on Twitter and Instagram. You can also go to check out podcasts on any of your podcast services for things like Horror News Radio, Gruesome Magazine, or Heroes and Droids. And then you can find out about my film stuff via my social medias.
You can follow me on Instagram at Ryan Cadaver, also at the Casket Creatures, and check out our music. We got a lot of music videos that are a lot of fun. They're like little mini horror movies, so it's a good time. we also lean very heavily into the horror comedy stuff, like big time. So it's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, that's my forte.
That's our whole thing.
You can find me on Instagram at BattleCougar. You can listen to my podcast. It's called Caught Dead Watching. It's been on hiatus for a little while because the world has gone crazy, but it's coming back theoretically. And also, please listen to all the Needless Things stuff, which Dave's about to plug. But you can hear me on the Needless Commentary team.
You can find the Needless Things podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We talk about all the stuff that you guys have been doing all weekend long here at Dragon Con. Check out the Needless Things YouTube channel. Toy reviews there pretty regularly. Lots of NECA stuff. Basically any horror toys I can get my hands on, I'll open them up and tell you what I think about them.
All right, yeah, and thank you all for coming. Please, if you like the panel, rate it 5 stars on the app. And if you can't, like I said, we do have to kind of vacate, but if you can, yes, please donate before you leave to Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Metro Atlanta. Really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your Dragon Con, everybody.
Don't get bit by werewolves.
No.
Stay off the moors.
Please check out Double Edge, Double Bill. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts. And check out Horror News Radio. I love being on panels with Thomas and Chris whenever possible. And, of course, the Cadavers, two of my dearest friends, best commentators, all around wonderful, delightful people. So that was a great, fun panel. And I hope next year we can get the same crew back for something else. I wonder what the theme was in 1982. Things of 1982, or the 1982. The thing about it was, I don't know, whatever. Please check out the Needless Things YouTube channel. That's the thing I'm really pushing lately. If I can get to, I think it's 1,000 subscribers, something happens. I think that's when I can monetize, if I'm remembering correctly, and that would be really nice to have a little coin coming in for a change. Oh, so okay. Real quick, I'll mention this. Speaking of the Needless Things YouTube channel, I will be doing a review soon of the WWE Hollywood They Live Rowdy Roddy Piper as John Nada. I found one at Walmart today. The box is kind of fucked up, but it doesn't matter because you know I'm going to open it and review it. Obviously, this does not compare to the NECA figure that came out a few months ago that I also reviewed a few months ago. Gosh, yeah, maybe earlier this year. I don't know. It's up there. You can find it. But I will be reviewing this, and there are some things about this one that are pretty good. So I'm interested in getting it out and taking a look at it. So Needless Things YouTube channel. Also join the Needless Things Facebook group where we have fun talking about stuff when I remember to put up polls and things in there. I'm busy, you guys. I do the best I can. Next week is Mr. Bo Brown for some Masters of the Universe stuff. And the week after that, Black Friday. I love you guys.
You have been listening to a Needless Things podcast. You can follow Needless Things on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and at needlessthingspodcast.com. Love you. Mean it. Uh-huh.